In 1776, the Chilean priest Juan Ignacio Molina highlights the island for its monumental statues, in the 5th chapter on Chilean islands of his book, Natural and Civil History of the Kingdom of Chile. 4 years later, in 1774, British explorer James Cook visited Easter Island. He reported that some statues had been toppled. Through the interpretation of Hitahiti, Cook learned the statues commemorated their former high chiefs, including their names and ranks. On 10 April 1786, French Admiral Jean-François de Gallerup, Comte de la Pérouse, anchored at Hunga Roa at the start of a circumnavigation of the Pacific. He made a detailed map of the bay, including his anchorage points, as well as a more generalized map of the island, plus some illustrations. A series of devastating events killed or removed most of the population in the 1860s. In December 1862, Peruvian slave raiders struck. Violent abductions continued for several months, eventually capturing around 1,500 men and women, half of the island's population. Among those captured were the island's paramount chief, his heir, and those who knew how to read and write the Rongorongo script, the only Polynesian script to have been found to date. Although debate exists about whether this is proto-writing or true writing. When the slave raiders were forced to repatriate the people they had kidnapped, carriers of smallpox disembarked together with a few survivors on each of the islands. This created devastating epidemics from Easter Island to the Marquesas Islands. Easter Island's population was reduced to the point where some of the dead were not even buried. The first Christian missionary, Eugene Ayraud, arrived in January 1864 and spent most of that year on the island and reported for the first time the existence of the so-called Rongo-Rongo tablets. But mass conversion of the Rapa Nui only came after his return in 1866 with Father Hippolyte Roussel. 2 other missionaries arrived with Captain Jean-Baptiste Dutrou-Bornier. Ayraud contracted tuberculosis during the 1867 island epidemic, which took a quarter of the island's remaining population of 1,200, with only 930 Rapa Nui remaining. The dead included the last Ariki Mau, the last East Polynesia royal firstborn son, the 13-year-old Manu Rangi. Ayraud died of tuberculosis in August 1868, by which time almost the entire Rapa Nui population had become Roman Catholic. Tuberculosis, introduced by whalers in the mid-19th century, had already killed several islanders when Eugene Ayraud died from this disease in 1867. It ultimately killed approximately a quarter of the island's population. In the following years, the managers of the sheep ranch and the missionaries started buying the newly available lands of the deceased, and this led to great confrontations between natives and settlers. Jean-Baptiste Dutrou-Bornier bought up all of the island apart from the missionaries' area around Hunga Roa and moved a few hundred Rapa Nui to Tahiti to work for his backers. In 1871 the missionaries, having fallen out with Dutrou-Bornier, evacuated all but 171 Rapa Nui to the Gambia Islands. Those who remained were mostly older men. 6 years later, only 111 people lived on Easter Island, and only 36 of them had any offspring. From that point on, the island's population slowly recovered. But with over 97% of the population dead or gone in less than a decade, much of the island's cultural knowledge had been lost. Alexander Salmon Jr., the son of an English-Jewish merchant and a Pomari dynasty princess, eventually worked to repatriate workers from his inherited copra plantation. He eventually bought up all lands on the island with the exception of the mission, and was its sole employer. He worked to develop tourism on the island and was the principal informant for the British and German archaeological expeditions for the island. He sent several pieces of genuine rongorongo to his niece's husband, the German consul in Valparaiso, Chile. Salmon sold the Brander Easter Island holdings to the Chilean government on 2 January 1888, and signed as a witness to the cession of the island. He returned to Tahiti in December 1888. He effectively ruled the island from 1878 until his cession to Chile in 1888. In 1887, Chile took concrete actions to incorporate the island into the national territory, at the request of the Chilean Navy captain Policarpo Toro, who was concerned about the unprotected situation of the Rapa Nui for decades and began to influence the situation on his own initiative. Policarpo, through negotiations, bought land on the island at the request of the Bishop of Valparaiso, Salvador Donoso Rodriguez, owner of 600 hectares, together with the Salmon brothers, Dutro Bornea and John Brander, from Tahiti. The Chilean captain put money from his own pocket for this purpose, together with £6,000 sent by the Chilean government. According to Rapa Nui tradition, the lands could not be sold. However, third parties believed they owned them and they were bought from them so that they would not interfere in the affairs of the island. From that moment on, at that time, the Rapa Nui population reached alarming numbers. In a census carried out by the Chilean corvette Abtao in 1892, there were only 101 Rapa Nui alive, of which only 12 were adult men. The Rapa Nui ethnic group, along with their culture, was at its closest point to extinction. Then, on September 9, 1888, thanks to the efforts of the Bishop of Tahiti, Monsignor José Maria Verdia, the Agreement of Wills Acuerdo de Voluntades was signed, in which the local representative Atamu Tekina, head of the Council of Rapa Nui chiefs, ceded the sovereignty of the island to the state of Chile, represented by Policarpo Toro. The Rapa Nui elders ceded sovereignty, without renouncing their titles as chiefs, the ownership of their lands, the validity of their culture and traditions, and on equal terms. The Rapa Nui sold nothing. They were integrated in equal conditions to Chile. The annexation to Chile, together with the abolition of slavery in Peru, brought the advantage that foreign slavers did not take any more inhabitants from the island. However, in 1895, the Compañía Explotadora de Isla de Pascua from Enrique Merlet obtained the concession of the entire island after the failure of the state's colonization plan following the Civil War of 1891 and the change of government in the country. The company imposed prohibitions to live and work outside Hunga Roa and even forced labor of the islanders in the company, something that was avoided thanks to the safe conducts given by the Navy that allowed the islanders to cross the entire island once the Navy took control of the island during the 20th century. In 1903, the island was bought by the English sheep farming company Williamson Balfour from the Merlet Company. And no longer being able to farm for food, the natives were forced to work on the ranches in order to buy food. In 1914, there was an uprising of the natives inspired by the elderly catechist Maria Angata Very and led by Daniel Maria Teve with the aim of getting the state to take charge of the situation generated by the company. The Navy held the company responsible for the brutal and savage acts committed by Merlet and the company's administrators, and an investigation was requested. In 1916, the island was declared a subdelegation of the Department of Valparaiso. In the same year, Archbishop Raphael Edwards Salas visited the island and became the main spokesman for the natives' complaints and demands. However, the Chilean state decided to renew the lease to the company, under the figure of the so-called provisional temperament, distributing additional lands to the natives 5 hectares per marriage as of 1926, allocating lands for the Chilean administration and establishing the permanent presence of the Navy, which in 1936 established a regulation according to which, with prior permission, the natives could leave Hunga Roa to fish or provide themselves with fuel. Monsignor Raphael Edwards sought to have the island declared a naval jurisdiction, in order to intervene in it as military vicar and in this way support the Rapa Nui community, creating better living conditions. In 1933, the Chilean State Defense Council required the registration of the island in the name of the state in order to protect it from private individuals who wanted to register it in their own name. Until the 1960s, the Rapa Nui were confined to Hunga Roa. The rest of the island was rented to the Williamson Balfour Company as a sheep farm until 1953, when President Carlos Ibanez del Campo cancelled the company's contract for non-compliance and then assigned the entire administration of the island to the Chilean Navy. The island was then managed by the Chilean Navy until 1966, at which point the island was reopened in its entirety. The Rapa Nui were given Chilean citizenship that year with the Pascua Law enacted during the government of Eduardo Frei Montalva. Only Spanish was taught in the schools until that year. The law also created the Isla de Pascua commune depending from the Valparaiso province and implemented the civil registry, created the positions of governor, mayor and councilman, as well as the 6th police station of Carabineros de Chile, the first fire company of Easter Island, schools and a hospital. The first mayor was sworn in 1966 and was Alfonso Rapu, who sent a letter to President Frei 2 years prior influencing him to create the Pascua Law. Islanders were only able to travel off the island easily after the construction of the Mataveri International Airport in 1965, which was built by the Longhi Construction Company, carrying hundreds of workers, heavy machinery, tents, and a field hospital on ships. However, its use did not go beyond airline operations with small groups of tourists. At the same time, a NASA tracking station operated on the island, which ceased operations in 1975.